so I need to get this off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. I'm not looking for sympathy or anything, just need to share this before I lose my mind. So, I've always been into weird shit online, especially the dark web. I know, it's a bad idea and all, but the thrill of finding something truly messed up always pulls me in. Last month, while browsing one of those sketchy forums, I stumbled upon a post with GPS coordinates and a simple message. Curious? Come and find out. The curiosity ate at me. I'm the type of person who's always looking for the next adrenaline rush, and this seemed perfect. The coordinates pointed to a remote area in the woods about 3 hours from where I live. After a week of mulling it over, I decided to check it out. Last Saturday, I packed up some basic camping gear, my knife, and a flashlight. The drive was uneventful, but once I left the highway and hit the dirt roads, the trees started to close in, thick and oppressive. The GPS led me deeper into the forest, past any semblance of civilization. I remember feeling a twinge of unease, but I brushed it off. After all, this was supposed to be an adventure, right? I parked my car at the end of a narrow, overgrown path. According to the GPS, the cabin was about a mile hike through the woods. As I trekked through the dense forest, the silence was unnerving. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, dead quiet. When I finally saw the cabin, it was almost anticlimactic. It was an old, decrepit wooden structure, barely standing. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on one hinge. Despite the state of the place, I felt a strange pull to go inside. The inside was worse than the outside. Rotten floorboards, a moldy stench, and graffiti covering the walls. It seemed like a typical abandoned shack until I found the basement door. It was padlocked, but the lock was rusted and broke easily with a few hits from a nearby rock. I hesitated, but my curiosity won. I descended the creaky stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dark and damp, with a single bulb flickering overhead. As the light swung back and forth, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols, smeared in what looked like dried blood. There were old, yellowed photographs pinned to the walls, people in various states of suffering, their eyes hollow and lifeless. A few of them had dates and notes scribbled on them. I couldn't bring myself to look too closely. In the corner, there was a crude wooden table with what looked like ritualistic objects, candles, a ceremonial knife, and a tattered book. I flipped through the book, and it was filled with disturbing illustrations and incomprehensible text. One image caught my eye, a sketch of a group of people wearing grotesque masks, standing around a bonfire. The masks were twisted and animalistic, with exaggerated features that made my stomach churn. That's when I heard the footsteps upstairs. My heart stopped. I turned off my flashlight and held my breath, praying they wouldn't come downstairs. I could hear muffled voices, low and chanting. The footsteps grew louder, and I realized there were more than one person up there. Panicking, I looked for a place to hide. There was a small crawl space beneath the stairs, barely big enough to fit me, but I squeezed in, trying to make myself as small as possible. The basement door creaked open, and I could see the flicker of candlelight as the intruders descended. From my hiding spot, I could see their feet in the hems of long, dark robes. They were speaking in hushed tones, their language guttural and alien. One of them stopped right in front of my hiding place. I could see the edge of their mask, a twisted, leering face with hollow eyes. I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. The fear was paralyzing. They moved around the basement, seemingly performing some kind of ritual. After what felt like an eternity, they left, and I heard the front door slam shut. I waited for what must have been an hour before crawling out. My body was stiff and aching. I knew I had to get out of there. I scrambled upstairs and ran out of the cabin, not stopping until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me several tries to get the key into the ignition. Driving back, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those masked figures chasing me. I didn't stop until I got home. Now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've noticed people lingering near my house, wearing hoodies and standing just far enough away that I can't see their faces. Last night, I found a symbol drawn on my front door in red paint. I don't know what I've gotten myself into, but I'm terrified. I haven't slept in days, and every time I close my eyes, I see those masks. I feel like I'm being hunted, and I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Please, if anyone has any idea what this is, help me. I don't know what to do. So, things have gotten worse since I wrote last time. I don't even know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. Every little sound makes me jump, and I'm barely sleeping. After I posted part 1, I decided to do some research on the symbols I found in that cabin. It took some digging, but I stumbled upon some occult forums and old, scanned books that mention similar markings. They seem to be tied to some ancient underground cult known for performing dark rituals. There's not much information out there, but what I found was enough to make my skin crawl. Stories about human sacrifices and summoning entities from beyond our world. The sort of stuff you hope is just a bad joke, but deep down, you know it's not. A couple of nights ago, I heard something outside my house. At first, it was just a faint rustling, like leaves being blown by the wind. But then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel driveway. I peeked through the blinds and saw them. 3 figures standing in my yard, wearing those grotesque masks. They didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at my house. My heart was pounding in my chest. I called the police, trying to stay as quiet as possible. By the time they arrived, the masked figures were gone. The officers looked around but found nothing. They probably thought I was just another paranoid nutjob, especially since I couldn't give them a clear description, just people with creepy masks. The next day, I decided to install some security cameras around my house. I thought maybe if I had proof, someone would take me seriously. I stayed up all night, watching the live feed on my laptop. At around 3 a.m., the cameras picked up movement. There they were again, just standing in the yard, closer this time. One of them even walked up to my front door and pressed his face against the peephole. That mask, twisted, animalistic, with those hollow eyes, made me feel like I was staring into the void. I shouted at them through the door, telling them to get the hell away from my property. They didn't react. They just stood there, unmoving, for what felt like hours. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they turned and walked back into the woods. Yesterday, things took an even darker turn. I came home from work to find my front door ajar. Inside, the place was trashed, furniture overturned, pictures smashed, and that damn symbol painted on the walls in what looked like blood. My first thought was to call the police, but something stopped me. What if they didn't believe me? Or worse, what if they were in on it? Paranoia was eating me alive. I went to clean up the mess and found something that made my stomach drop. An old photograph pinned to my fridge with a knife. It was one of the pictures from the cabin, showing a woman bound and gagged, her eyes filled with terror. Scrawled across the bottom was a single word: soon. I don't know what they want from me. I don't know why they're doing this. All I know is that I can't keep living like this. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. I've started carrying my knife with me everywhere, but I don't even know if it will help. I'm considering going back to the cabin. Maybe if I find out more about this cult, I can figure out how to stop them, or at least understand what I'm up against. Part of me is terrified that this is exactly what they want, that they're drawing me back for some horrible reason. But I can't just sit here and wait for whatever's coming. I'll write again once I have more information. If anyone has any advice or knows anything about these symbols or this cult, please share it. I'm desperate. I can't believe I'm doing this, but here we go. I decided to go back to the cabin. Maybe it's a death wish, or maybe I'm just too far gone to care, but I need answers. I spent the entire day yesterday preparing, packing food, water, extra batteries, and my knife. I even borrowed a friend's old revolver, though I'm not sure it'll do any good against whatever the hell these people are. I left a note with a friend, explaining everything and asking them to call the cops if they didn't hear from me within 48 hours. I'm not taking any chances. The drive back felt surreal, like I was heading straight into a nightmare. The further I got from civilization, the heavier the air felt. By the time I parked and started walking the overgrown path to the cabin, my nerves were shot. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of a branch made me jump. When I reached the cabin, it looked even more decrepit than before. The front door was still slightly ajar, creaking on its hinges. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped inside. The stench of mold and decay hit me like a punch in the face. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand. The basement was my first stop. I needed to see if there was anything I missed last time. The old padlock was gone, replaced by a heavy-duty bolt. I broke it open with a few hard swings of a crowbar I brought along. Descending those stairs again felt like stepping into the jaws of hell. The symbols on the walls were still there, but this time, I noticed something new. A fresh smear of blood leading to a corner of the room. My heart pounded as I followed the trail, my flashlight beam shaking. I found a small wooden trapdoor hidden under a dusty old rug. Prying it open, I revealed a narrow, pitch-black tunnel. The air that wafted up from it was damp and rank. I had no idea where it led, but I knew I had to find out. The tunnel was just wide enough to crawl through. As I made my way forward, the walls felt like they were closing in on me, the darkness absolute. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed a horrifying sight, an underground room lined with cages. In each cage was a person, barely alive, their eyes wide with terror. They were filthy, covered in sores, and their clothes were nothing but rags. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight catching the twisted face of one of those masked figures. The mask was even more grotesque up close, the hollow eyes seeming to bore into my soul. He lunged at me, and I barely dodged, scrambling to get back into the tunnel. My mind was racing, adrenaline pumping as I crawled back, hearing the clattering footsteps of the masked figure right behind me. I reached the trapdoor and pulled myself up, slamming it shut just as he reached it. I didn't waste any time. I bolted up the basement stairs, through the cabin, and out into the night. I could hear the shouts and chants behind me, the cultists giving chase. I ran like my life depended on it. And maybe it did. The woods were a blur of darkness and fear. I could barely see where I was going, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't know how I made it back to my car, but I did. I jumped in, locking the doors and starting the engine. As I sped away, I saw them emerging from the trees, their masks illuminated by my taillights. They didn't follow me onto the road, but I could feel their eyes on me the entire way back home. When I got back, I collapsed on my couch, shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't believe what I had seen. The people in the cages, the underground chamber. This isn't just some crazy cult. It's something much worse. I tried calling the police again, but my phone was dead, and my landline had been cut. This morning, I woke up to find another photograph slipped under my door. This one was of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. The message on the back read, "You can't escape. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what they want, but I can't keep running. If anyone out there has any advice, please, I'm begging you. I'm scared out of my mind and running out of options." I barely slept last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those cages, those poor souls trapped and hopeless. I couldn't shake the feeling that this isn't just about me stumbling onto something I shouldn't have. It's something deeper, more sinister. I'm not just a random target. They know who I am, and they're playing with me. This morning, I decided I couldn't sit around waiting to be hunted. I needed to take some kind of action. I started by driving to a nearby town, where I rented a cheap motel room under a false name. I needed a safe place to think and plan my next move. It's hard to feel safe anywhere now, but at least it's a start. While holed up in the motel, I spent hours scouring the internet, trying to find more information about the cult. I found an old obscure forum where someone had posted about a similar experience. The details matched: the masks, the rituals, the symbols. The user claimed the cult was known as the Order of the Veil, a secret society dating back centuries, obsessed with summoning dark entities and gaining power through human suffering. One post mentioned a survivor, a man who had escaped their clutches and lived to tell the tale. I managed to track him down through some sketchy online detective work, and convinced him to meet me at a diner on the outskirts of town. His name was David, and he looked like he'd been through hell and back. Deep scars ran along his arms, and his eyes were haunted. Over a cup of black coffee, he told me his story, how he'd been taken by the Order, tortured, and forced to witness unspeakable rituals. He had managed to escape during a chaotic moment, but had been living in fear ever since, constantly moving, never staying in one place for too long. "They don't stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once they mark you, they'll hunt you down. They're relentless, and they're everywhere." I asked him how he managed to survive this long. He leaned in closer, his voice trembling. You have to disrupt their rituals, break their symbols. It weakens their hold on you. But most importantly, you need to expose them. They thrive in secrecy. Bring their actions to light, and they lose power. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided to take action. That night, I went back to my house, my mind set on finding any evidence I could to expose them. I knew it was risky, but I had no other choice. I needed something concrete, something that would make people believe me. When I arrived, my house was eerily quiet. I crept inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Everything was just as I'd left it, except for one thing. A new symbol painted on my living room wall, larger and more intricate than before. It was still wet, the paint glistening in the beam of my flashlight. My heart pounded as I moved through the house, searching for any signs of their presence. I found another photograph on my bed, this one showing the inside of the underground chamber, with me crawling out of the tunnel. They had been there, watching me the whole time. I knew I didn't have much time. I grabbed my laptop and started downloading the security footage from my cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of their faces, anything that could help identify them. As the files transferred, I heard a noise from the basement, a soft, rhythmic chanting. I tiptoed to the basement door, my stomach churning. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. I opened the door and peered down, my flashlight revealing 3 masked figures standing in a circle, their hands raised. In the center was a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. I didn't think. I just acted. I charged down the stairs, swinging the crowbar I'd brought with me. The figures scattered, surprised by my sudden attack. I managed to knock one of them to the ground, his mask cracking and revealing a pale, scarred face beneath. The other 2 lunged at me, but I fought back, adrenaline giving me strength. I managed to free the woman, and we bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind us. I grabbed my laptop and the downloaded footage, and we ran out of the house, not stopping until we reached my car. We drove in silence, both of us too shaken to speak. I dropped her off at a hospital, making her promise not to tell anyone who had brought her there. I couldn't risk the cult finding out and tracking us down again. Now, I'm back at the motel, my heart still racing. I have the footage, and I'm planning to upload it to every social media platform, every conspiracy forum, every news site I can think of. They can't silence me if the whole world is watching. But as I write this, I know it's not over. The Order of the Veil won't stop until they get what they want, and I can't shake the feeling that the real horror is still to come. I can barely keep my eyes open. The adrenaline that's kept me going these past few days is wearing thin. This might be the last update I can manage before everything catches up with me. After I uploaded the footage, things escalated quickly. Within hours, the videos were everywhere. News outlets picked up the story, and conspiracy theorists went wild. The footage showed everything. The masked figures, the symbols, the woman I saved. It was undeniable proof that something dark and twisted was happening. But that's when the real terror began. I started getting calls from unknown numbers, the voices on the other end, whispering threats and chanting in that same guttural language I'd heard in the basement. They knew where I was staying. Every few hours, someone would knock on my motel door. But when I checked, no one was there. I was living in a constant state of fear, waiting for the next move. Last night, I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the revolver from under my pillow. I crept out of bed, my eyes straining to see in the dark. The motel room window was broken, glass shards glittering on the floor. A brick lay in the middle of the room, wrapped in a piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was another photograph, this time of my parents' house, with the same words scrawled across it, "Soon." I knew then that they weren't just after me. They were targeting everyone I loved. I called my parents and told them to get out of town, to go somewhere safe and not tell me where. They thought I was overreacting, but I convinced them it was serious. After that, I called a few close friends, giving them the same warning. Desperation pushed me to reach out to David again. He agreed to meet me in a secluded park, far from prying eyes. When I arrived, he was already there, looking more haggard than before. "They're tightening the noose," he said, his voice raw. "Once they know you're a threat, They won't stop until you're silenced. We talked about options. He suggested going to the authorities, but we both knew that wouldn't work. The Order's influence ran deep, and we couldn't trust anyone. David had one last piece of advice, something he'd been reluctant to share before. There was a ritual, a way to break their hold, but it was risky. It involved confronting them on their own turf and disrupting their main ceremony. With no other choice, we formulated a plan. That night, we drove back to the cabin, armed and ready. The woods were even more foreboding than before, the silence thick and suffocating. We approached the cabin cautiously, and to our surprise, it was deserted. The trapdoor to the underground chamber was open. We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The chamber was empty. The cages gone. At the far end of the room, we found another tunnel leading deeper into the earth. We followed it, our flashlights barely piercing the thick blackness. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, dimly lit by torches. In the center was a massive stone altar, covered in symbols and surrounded by masked figures. They were chanting, their voices echoing off the cavern walls. David handed me a small vial of liquid. "Throw this on the altar," he whispered. "It'll break their ritual and weaken them." I took the vial, my hands shaking, and crept closer. My heart was pounding in my ears, the air thick with the smell of incense and decay. I reached the edge of the circle and flung the vial onto the altar. The liquid hissed and bubbled, the symbols glowing brightly before fading away. Chaos erupted. The masked figures screamed and flailed, their ritual disrupted. David and I fought our way through the confusion, using everything we had to fend off the cultists. The cavern was filled with the sounds of struggle and the stench of burning flesh as the altar disintegrated. We barely made it out alive. As we stumbled back through the tunnel, I heard the cavern collapsing behind us, the earth swallowing the cult's lair. We emerged into the night, gasping for air and covered in dirt and blood. It's been a few days since then, and I'm still on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But for now, things seem quieter. The calls have stopped, and the knocks on my door have ceased. I know they're still out there, but maybe, just maybe, we've bought ourselves some time. I'm planning to disappear for a while, to lay low until I can figure out my next move. The Order of the Veil isn't gone, but their grip on me has weakened. I'm hoping that by sharing my story, others will be on guard, that they won't fall into the same trap I did. If you're reading this, be careful. There are dark things in this world, hiding just beneath the surface. And if you ever stumble across a set of coordinates on the dark web, for the love of God, don't follow them. I've always had a fascination with the dark web. There's something about the forbidden and the unknown that draws people in, like moths to a flame. I thought I was smart enough to handle it, to keep my curiosity in check. But what I found, I wish I could unsee it. This is my story. It all started on a Friday night. I was bored out of my mind, scrolling through endless Reddit threads about urban legends and conspiracy theories. Somehow, I found myself on a subreddit dedicated to the dark web. People were sharing their experiences. Most of them seemed like pure fiction. But one comment caught my eye. It was from a user named Obscura Rex. If you think you can handle it, check out this site, 7Q8X6AB Not for the faint of heart. I copied the address into my Tor browser, half expecting it to lead nowhere, but the page loaded almost instantly. It was simple, just a black background with white text. "Welcome to the dark path. Enter at your own risk." I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the link, and that's when everything started to spiral out of control. The site looked like a forum from the early 2000s, all plain text and basic HTML. There were different sections: rituals, members, sacrifices. I clicked on members first. It was just a list of usernames, some of them marked with red crosses. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I would soon find out. Next, I clicked on rituals. There were detailed descriptions of various ceremonies, all involving some form of sacrifice or self-mutilation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read about the Blood Moon ritual, where members were required to cut themselves and offer their blood to an unseen deity. I was about to close the browser when a message popped up on the screen. "Welcome, new member. Would you like to join us?" Below the message there were two buttons, yes and no. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was too real, too intense. But something compelled me to click yes. Almost immediately, I received a private message from Obscura Rex. "Welcome to the dark path. Are you ready to prove your loyalty?" I didn't know what to say. I was scared, but also intrigued. I typed back, "What do I need to do?" "Meet me at the following address tomorrow at midnight. Come alone." He provided an address that was only a few miles from my apartment. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I told myself it was just an adventure, something to break the monotony of my life. The next night, I found myself driving to the address. It was a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. I parked my car and approached the entrance. The heavy metal door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. I walked inside, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. At the end of the hallway, there was a room filled with people wearing dark robes and masks. They were chanting in a language I didn't understand. In the center of the room, there was an altar covered in blood. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around to see Obscura Rex. He was wearing a mask too, but I could see his eyes. They were cold, devoid of any emotion. "Are you ready to prove your loyalty?" he asked. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He handed me a knife and pointed to the altar. "You need to make a sacrifice." I looked at the altar and saw a small animal, a rabbit, struggling against its restraints. I felt sick to my stomach, but I knew I couldn't back out now. I walked up to the altar and with shaking hands, slit the rabbit's throat. Blood poured out, staining the altar red. The room erupted in cheers and chants. Obscura Rex took the knife from me and placed it back on the altar. He then handed me a robe and a mask. "Welcome to the dark path," he said. I put on the robe and mask, feeling like I had just sold my soul. The ceremony continued, with more sacrifices and rituals. I felt like I was in a trance, unable to process what was happening around me. After what felt like hours, Obscura Rex led me to a back room. It was small and dark, with only a single candle providing light. He handed me a piece of paper and a pen. "Write your deepest, darkest secret," he instructed. I hesitated, but eventually I wrote down something I had never told anyone, something I was deeply ashamed of. He took the paper from me and read it, then smiled. "Good. You're one of us now." I left the warehouse that night, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into, but I knew there was no turning back. I had become a part of something dark and twisted, something that would haunt me for the rest of my life, and that was just the beginning. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood-stained altar, the lifeless body of the rabbit, and the cold, emotionless eyes of Obscura Rex. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream, a figment of my overactive imagination. But the robe and mask lying on my bedroom floor told me otherwise. The next day, I received another message from Obscura Rex. "Tonight, we meet again. Same place, same time." I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to go back, but I knew I had no choice. I was in too deep. That night, I returned to the warehouse. The atmosphere was different this time, more intense. The members were gathered around the altar, their faces hidden behind their masks. Obscura Rex stood at the front, holding a book bound in what looked like human skin. "Tonight, we welcome our new brother," he announced, his voice echoing through the room. The members turned to face me, their eyes burning with an almost fanatical fervor. I felt a chill run down my spine as they began to chant in unison. "Blood for blood, life for life, we are the dark path." Obscura Rex approached me, holding the book out. "Place your hand on the book and swear your allegiance." I hesitated for a moment, then placed my hand on the book. It felt cold and clammy, like the skin of a corpse. "I swear my allegiance to the dark path," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The room erupted in cheers. Obscura Rex handed me a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "Drink this," he instructed. I took the vial and looked at the liquid inside. It smelled foul, like rotting flesh. I hesitated, but Obscura Rex nodded encouragingly. I closed my eyes and drank the liquid. It burned as it went down, leaving a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and my vision started to blur. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, surrounded by the masked members. They were chanting louder now, their voices merging into a deafening roar. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. Obscura Rex knelt beside me, his face inches from mine. "Welcome to the dark path, brother," he whispered, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. I had no memory of how I got there. The robe and mask were gone, but the taste of the foul liquid still lingered in my mouth. I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, my body shaking uncontrollably. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin pale and clammy. I felt like I was losing my mind. I received another message from Obscura Rex that day. "Congratulations, brother. You have taken the first step on the dark path. There is no turning back now." I knew he was right. I was trapped, bound to the cult by blood and fear. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it was going to be dark and terrifying. And this was only the beginning of my descent into the abyss. After that night, everything changed. I tried to go about my daily life, pretending everything was normal. But the truth was, I was living a double life, constantly looking over my shoulder, paranoid that someone might discover my secret. My sleep was plagued by nightmares of blood and dark rituals, and my waking hours were filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. A week after my initiation, I received another message from Obscura Rex. "Prepare yourself for the next step. We meet tomorrow at midnight. Bring a personal belonging, something that holds significant meaning to you." The thought of returning to that warehouse made my stomach churn, but I knew I had no choice. I rummaged through my things, looking for something to bring. My eyes settled on a small silver locket that my mother had given me before she passed away. It was my most cherished possession, and the idea of using it in one of their twisted rituals filled me with sorrow. But I knew it would be enough to prove my loyalty. The next night, I drove back to the warehouse. This time, the atmosphere was even more ominous. The members were gathered around a large circular table, their faces hidden behind their masks. In the center of the table was an ornate chalice filled with a thick, dark liquid. Obscura Rex stood at the head of the table, holding a ceremonial dagger. He beckoned me to approach. "Place your offering on the table," he commanded. I placed the locket on the table, feeling a pang of sadness as I let go of it. Obscura Rex picked it up and examined it, then nodded approvingly. "Tonight, you will partake in the sacrament of blood. It is a rite of passage for all members of the dark path. You will drink from the chalice and seal your bond with us." He handed me the chalice, and I hesitated. The liquid inside smelled metallic, like blood. I glanced around the room, feeling the eyes of the other members on me. I knew I couldn't back out now. I brought the chalice to my lips and drank. The taste was revolting, a mixture of blood and something else, something foul. I gagged, but forced myself to swallow. As soon as I did, a wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt my vision blur. Obscura Rex handed me the dagger. "Now, you must complete the ritual. Cut your palm and let your blood mingle with ours." I took the dagger, my hands shaking. I pressed the blade against my palm and sliced, feeling a sharp pain as blood oozed from the wound. I held my hand over the chalice, letting the blood drip into it. The other members followed suit, cutting their palms and adding their blood to the chalice. When it was done, Obscura Rex raised the chalice and began to chant in that strange, otherworldly language. The members joined in, their voices rising in a haunting chorus. I felt a strange energy in the room, like a dark presence watching us. The chanting grew louder, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I heard whispers all around me, sinister and unintelligible. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned to see Obscura Rex standing behind me, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Welcome to the dark path, brother," he whispered. "You have taken the sacrament of blood. You are one of us now." The lights flickered back on, and the oppressive energy dissipated. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of the other members, their expressions hidden behind their masks. I felt a sense of unease, knowing that I was now bound to this cult by blood. As I left the warehouse that night, I felt a cold chill settle over me. I knew I was in too deep, that there was no escaping the dark path. My life had been irrevocably changed, and I didn't know if I would ever find a way out. Over the next few weeks, I became more and more entrenched in the cult. I attended their meetings and participated in their rituals, each one more disturbing than the last. I watched as new members were initiated, their fear and confusion mirroring my own. One night, Obscura Rex called me into a private room. It was small and dimly lit, with strange symbols painted on the walls. He sat behind a desk, a look of grave seriousness on his face. "We have a special task for you," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You must prove your loyalty once and for all." I opened the folder and felt my blood run cold. Inside were photographs of a young woman, her eyes filled with terror. There were detailed instructions on how to find her, along with a knife and a small vial of the same dark liquid from the chalice. "You must bring her to us," Obscura Rex said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She is essential to our next ritual. Do not fail us." I felt a wave of panic wash over me. This was too much. I couldn't do it. But I knew that refusing would mean my own death. I took the folder and the knife, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. That night, I drove to the address provided in the folder. It was a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was in a nightmare, unable to wake up. I crept around the back of the house and found an unlocked window. I climbed inside, my hands shaking. The house was dark and silent. The only sound was my own breathing. I made my way to the bedroom where the woman lay sleeping. I stood over her, the knife in my hand, feeling a sickening sense of dread. I couldn't do it. I couldn't hurt her. But I knew that if I didn't, the cult would come after me. I was trapped, caught between my fear and my conscience. Suddenly, the woman stirred and opened her eyes. She saw me standing there with the knife and screamed. I panicked, lunging forward and pressing the knife to her throat. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Don't hurt me." I hesitated, my resolve wavering. I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the monster they wanted me to be. I lowered the knife and stepped back. "Run," I whispered. "Get out of here, now." She didn't need to be told twice. She bolted from the bed and ran out of the house, disappearing into the night. I stood there, my mind racing. I knew I had just signed my own death warrant. I returned to the warehouse, expecting the worst. Obscura Rex was waiting for me, his expression unreadable. "Did you bring her?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to speak. He sighed, a look of disappointment on his face. "You have failed us," he said. "You know what that means." I nodded, my heart sinking. I knew there was no escape, no way out. I was trapped in the dark web of the cult, bound by blood and fear. And so, my descent into darkness continued, each step taking me further from the light. After my failure to bring the woman to the cult, I lived in constant fear. Every knock on the door, every unexpected noise made my heart race. I knew the punishment would come, but I didn't know when or how. The waiting was almost worse than the actual fear of what might happen. It was a cold, rainy night when I received the message. My phone buzzed, and I saw the notification from Obscura Rex. "You have one last chance to prove your loyalty. Meet us at the old quarry at midnight. Come alone." The quarry was a desolate place on the outskirts of town, a perfect setting for whatever grim fate awaited me. I drove there, the sound of the rain hammering on the car roof, matching the pounding of my heart. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The quarry was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the full moon that occasionally broke through the clouds. I parked my car and made my way down the steep, rocky path. At the bottom, I saw the cult members gathered around a large, circular stone altar. Torches flickered in the rain, casting eerie shadows on the wet ground. Obscura Rex stood in the center, his mask glistening with raindrops. He gestured for me to come forward. "This is your final chance," he said, his voice cold and devoid of mercy. "Prove your loyalty or face the consequences." I felt a sense of hopelessness wash over me. I knew I was trapped, with no way out. I approached the altar, and Obscura Rex handed me a knife, the same one I had used during my initiation. "Tonight, you will take part in the trial of shadows," he announced. You must face your darkest fears and emerge victorious. He pointed to a cave entrance on the other side of the quarry. Inside that cave, you will find your trial. Succeed, and you will be forgiven. Fail, and you will never leave. I took the knife and made my way to the cave. The entrance was dark and foreboding, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow all light. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing off the damp walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay. And something else, something I couldn't identify. As I ventured deeper into the cave, the darkness became almost tangible, pressing in on me from all sides. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Suddenly I heard a noise, a faint whispering that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I turned a corner and saw a flickering light ahead. I approached cautiously, the knife held tightly in my hand. The light came from a small makeshift altar, similar to the one outside, but smaller and more sinister. On the altar lay a book, bound in what looked like human skin. I opened the book and began to read. The pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations, written in a language I couldn't understand. As I read, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. I turned back to the book and saw that the symbols had changed. They now formed words in English, spelling out a chilling message: face your fears or perish. The whispering grew louder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned again and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a grotesque, twisted version of myself, with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. It moved towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I raised the knife, but my hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The figure reached out and grabbed my wrist, its grip cold and clammy. I struggled, but it was too strong. It pulled me towards the altar, forcing me to look into its hollow eyes. I saw my deepest fears reflected in those eyes. Memories of my darkest moments, my worst mistakes, my most shameful secrets. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, threatening to pull me under. But then, something inside me snapped. I realized that if I didn't fight back, I would be lost forever. I summoned all my strength and plunged the knife into the figure's chest. It let out a shriek, a sound that echoed through the cave like a chorus of tormented souls. The figure dissolved into a cloud of darkness, and the whispering stopped. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The cave was silent, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly. I knew I had passed the trial, but at what cost? I made my way back to the entrance, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The cult members were waiting for me, their expressions hidden behind their masks. Obscura Rex stepped forward, his eyes glinting in the torchlight. "You have proven your loyalty," he said. "You are one of us." I felt no sense of relief, no triumph, only a deep, abiding fear of what lay ahead. I had faced my darkest fears, but I knew that the true horror was just beginning. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. The cult had a hold on me, and I knew that there was no escape. My life had become a nightmare, and I didn't know if I would ever wake up. The next day, I received another message from Obscura Rex. "Prepare yourself, brother. The true test is yet to come." I knew then that my ordeal was far from over. The dark path was leading me deeper into darkness, and I had no choice but to follow. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I could hardly eat or sleep, haunted by the knowledge that the cult's true test was imminent. I became a ghost of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting the worst. One night, I received a message that sent a chill down my spine. It was from an unknown number, but the content was unmistakable. Tonight, midnight, the old church. I knew the place well. It was an abandoned church on the outskirts of town, a place shrouded in local legends and tales of hauntings. My heart pounded as I made my way there, the cold wind biting through my clothes. The church loomed in the darkness, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, which groaned in protest. Inside, the church was a ruin. Pews were overturned, and the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. At the altar stood Obscura Rex and the other cult members, their masks glinting in the dim light of the candles they held. "Welcome," Obscura Rex said, his voice echoing through the empty space. "Tonight, You will face the true test of your loyalty and courage. Fail, and you will not leave this place alive. He motioned for me to come forward. On the altar lay a large, ornate box. Obscura Rex opened it to reveal a collection of strange, ancient artifacts. A dagger, a small vial of black liquid, a piece of parchment covered in symbols, and a worn, leather-bound book. Tonight, you will summon him. Obscura Rex said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. The Dark One, our master. A shiver ran down my spine. I had read about such rituals on the dark web, but I had never believed they could be real. The idea of summoning some dark entity seemed like the stuff of horror movies, but standing there, I could feel the malevolent energy in the air. Recite the words on the parchment, Obscura Rex instructed, handing it to me. Then, drink the elixir. I took the parchment with trembling hands. The symbols swam before my eyes, but somehow I could understand them. I began to read, my voice shaking. As I spoke the words, the temperature in the church seemed to drop. A cold wind swept through the building, extinguishing the candles one by one until only the dim light from the moon illuminated the scene. The shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around us. I reached for the vial and uncorked it. The liquid inside smelled of death and decay, but I knew I had no choice. I drank it in one gulp, gagging at the taste. It burned as it went down, and I felt a wave of nausea and dizziness. Obscura Rex handed me the dagger. Now, spill your blood onto the altar. I slashed my palm and let the blood drip onto the ancient wood. As soon as the first drop hit, the room was filled with a deafening roar. The shadows converged, forming a dark, towering figure at the altar. Its eyes glowed red, and its presence was suffocating. The cult members knelt, chanting in that strange, guttural language. I stood frozen, staring at the entity before me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a nightmare made flesh. Who dares summon me? The entity's voice was a deep rumble that shook the very foundations of the church. Obscura Rex rose to his feet, his head bowed. Master, we offer you a new servant, one who has proven his loyalty and courage. The entity turned its gaze to me, its eyes boring into my soul. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if my very essence was being stripped away. Kneel before me, the entity commanded. I dropped to my knees, unable to resist its power. The entity reached out a shadowy hand and placed it on my head. A searing pain shot through me, and I screamed, my vision going black. When I came to, I was lying on the cold stone floor. The entity was gone, but the cult members were still there, watching me with their masked faces. You have been marked, Obscura Rex said, helping me to my feet. You are now truly one of us. I looked down at my hands and saw strange, dark symbols etched into my skin, still burning with an unnatural fire. I felt different, changed. The fear and anxiety were still there, but now they were mingled with a dark power, a connection to something beyond this world. We have one final task for you, Obscura Rex said. Prove your loyalty by bringing us another. Find someone worthy, someone whose soul we can offer to our master. I nodded, knowing I had no choice. The dark path I had chosen was now my only path. I left the church that night, my mind reeling from what had happened. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to come to terms with the darkness now inside me. The symbols on my skin burned whenever I thought about disobeying the cult. I knew what I had to do, but the idea of dragging someone else into this nightmare was unbearable. I decided to find someone who deserved it, someone whose disappearance wouldn't be missed. I spent nights on the dark web, searching for the perfect target. Eventually, I found him, a predator lurking in chat rooms, preying on the vulnerable. I tracked him down, following him to a secluded spot where he often met his victims. I confronted him, and when he tried to fight back, I overpowered him with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The dark power inside me surged, and I felt a grim satisfaction as I dragged him to the old church. The cult was waiting for me. They took the man without a word, dragging him to the altar. Obscura Rex nodded approvingly. You have done well, he said. Your place among us is secure. I watched as they performed the ritual, feeling a mix of horror and relief. I had proven my loyalty, but at what cost? The man's screams echoed through the church, mingling with the chants of the cult. The dark figure appeared again, accepting the sacrifice with a chilling smile. As I left the church that night, I knew there was no turning back. The dark path had consumed me, and I was now a part of something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. I returned home, the symbols on my skin still burning. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back at me, someone marked by darkness and bound to a cult that demanded more and more from me. The true test was over, but I knew that the demands of the dark path would never end. I was trapped, bound by blood and fear, and the darkness inside me was growing stronger every day. The nightmare was far from over, and I had no idea what horrors awaited me next. The days after the final ritual were a haze of nightmares and constant fear. I could feel the darkness inside me growing, twisting my thoughts and corrupting my soul. The symbols on my skin burned with a relentless fire, a constant reminder of the dark pact I had made. I knew it was only a matter of time before the cult called on me again. The message came late one night. My phone buzzed, and I saw the familiar notification from Obscura Rex. Tonight, the abandoned asylum, your final task. The abandoned asylum was a place of local legend, rumored to be haunted and filled with the tortured spirits of its former patients. It was the perfect setting for the cult's final, most sinister ritual. I knew that whatever awaited me there would be far worse than anything I had experienced before. I drove to the asylum, the darkness outside reflecting the darkness within me. The building loomed ahead, its windows broken and walls covered in graffiti. I parked my car and walked towards the entrance, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of decaying rooms and long, dark corridors. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot. I made my way through the building, following the faint sound of chanting that echoed through the halls. Eventually, I found the cult gathered in what used to be the main ward. Obscura Rex stood in the center, flanked by the other members. The room was filled with strange symbols painted in blood, and in the middle of it all was a large stone slab. On the slab lay a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "Welcome," Obscura Rex said, his voice cold and commanding. "Tonight, you will complete your transformation. You will become one with the darkness, and your soul will be forever bound to our master." He handed me the dagger, the same one I had used in the previous rituals. I felt its weight in my hand, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. "To prove your ultimate loyalty, you must take her life," he continued. "Her blood will seal your bond with the Dark One." I looked at the woman, her eyes pleading with me for mercy. Every part of me wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but I knew there was no way out. I was trapped, bound by the dark pact I had made. I stepped forward, raising the dagger. The chanting grew louder, filling the room with a deafening roar. The symbols on my skin burned hotter than ever, and I felt the dark power surging through me. But just as I was about to bring the dagger down, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't take another innocent life. The darkness inside me recoiled, and I felt a surge of defiance. "No," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "I won't do it." The chanting stopped abruptly, and the room fell into a tense silence. Obscura Rex stared at me, his eyes burning with fury. "You dare defy us?" he hissed. "You know the consequences." I knew what was coming, but I didn't care. I couldn't let them turn me into a monster. I threw the dagger to the ground and backed away from the altar. "Then you will die," Obscura Rex said, his voice cold and final. The cult members advanced on me, their eyes filled with a murderous intent. I turned and ran, my heart pounding with fear. I sprinted through the dark corridors, the sounds of their footsteps echoing behind me. I stumbled through the asylum, desperate to find a way out. The building seemed to close in around me, the walls shifting and warping in the darkness. I could hear the cult members closing in, their voices chanting in that eerie, guttural language. I burst through a door and found myself in what looked like a therapy room. In the corner, I saw a broken window, the glass shards glinting in the moonlight. I didn't hesitate. I ran towards it and climbed through, cutting myself on the jagged edges. Outside, I kept running, the cold night air stinging my lungs. I didn't stop until I was far from the asylum, the sounds of the cult fading into the distance. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. For days, I stayed hidden, moving from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. I knew the cult would come for me, that they wouldn't stop until they had their revenge. The symbols on my skin still burned, a constant reminder of the darkness that had marked me. I knew I couldn't run forever. Eventually, I would have to face them, to find a way to break free from the dark pact that bound me. But for now, all I could do was survive, to stay one step ahead of the cult and hope that someday I would find a way to escape their grasp. The darkness inside me was still there, lurking, waiting. But I had made a choice, and I would fight to keep my humanity, no matter the cost. The dark path had taken everything from me, but it hadn't taken my soul. Not yet. As I sat alone in the darkness, I vowed to find a way to destroy the cult, to free myself from their evil once and for all. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but I was determined. I had faced my darkest fears, and I had survived. Now, it was time to fight back. And so, my journey continued, a battle against the darkness that had consumed my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I would never stop fighting. I would never give in to the darkness. I would find a way to break free or die trying.